Welcome, everyone. You are at the Earlier the Better, Survive COVID and Thrive Tomorrow. It's a learning session about childcare in West Virginia. And to kick us off, Helen Post Brown is going to speak with us about this initiative. She represents West Virginia Association for Young Children, and she also is the director of a child care center in West Virginia. Helen?
Thank you, Leslie. Good afternoon, and welcome to our second Survive COVID and Thrive Tomorrow event. I am Helen Post Brown, Vice President of the West Virginia Association for Young Children. WVAYC is an affiliate of the Southern Early Childhood Association. We're a nonprofit organization made up of early childhood educators in West Virginia. We are dedicated to supporting high-quality early childhood programs, expanding opportunities for early childhood professionals, and advocating for West Virginia's young children. This past August, our board of directors saw a need to advocate for child care centers. To say that being a child care provider this past year has been challenging would be an understatement. As we know, child care providers were essential long before COVID-19, but the pandemic has underscored how essential child care is. Without child care, families cannot go to work, children learn, businesses operate, and the economy grow. WVAYC realized that we could not fight this cause alone. This is when Survive COVID and Thrive Tomorrow and our collaboration with Dr. Jeffrey and Keys for Healthy Kids began. Our first call to action was to increase West Virginia child care subsidy reimbursement rates to all child care programs by $4 per child per day, and reimburse child care programs based on enrollment, not daily attendance. As we continue our first call to action, we are working alongside Keys for Healthy Kids to shine a light on the important resources that will soon be available to support childcare in West Virginia. Because of COVID, there is an increased interest in strengthening childcare infrastructure. We are anxious to support the Department of Health and Human Resources and discuss how we can help them to improve our childcare system for the future of all of our West Virginia children. Leslie?
Thank you, Helen. Welcome, everybody. And I want to say a special thank you for choosing to spend your time with us today. We have parents, we have child care providers that own businesses in West Virginia. We have West Virginia Small Business Development Center's business coaches and the state director, Deborah Martin. And we have community agencies that are made up of child care resource and referrals, private foundations, advocates. So we're very, very glad to have you here today. My name is Leslie Stone, and I will serve as your facilitator. And all that means is I'll help try to keep us on track. I'll try to help increase your understanding, clarify any questions you have, and help you work together to move forward. So that's my role today. Jessie Kreiner is working on the back end to support us. She's with Keys for West Virginia Kids. Well, sorry, Keys for Healthy Kids. And if you need help from Jessie, she's got some information in the chat box where you can communicate with her. All of you are going to be muted throughout the presentation. And so we'll unmute you when you get into breakout rooms, and I'll explain a little bit about that more in just a minute. But the real feature of our conversation today is a conversation with Lisa Ertl, who is the director of West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources, Division of Early Care and Education. And she's going to share with us some exciting opportunities that are in front of West Virginia. And Barbara Gebhardt, who is a consultant with Keys for Healthy Kids, will facilitate that conversation with Lisa. And then we'll do some breakout groups based on your stakeholder sectors. And what I mean by that is parents will get to meet together and talk. Community agencies will get together and talk. West Virginia business coaches will get together and talk, and child care providers will get together and talk. And we had to kind of make some adjustments because some groups were so large that we split you in half. But Each group will have a facilitator and they're ready to record your main thoughts as we go through the day. So if you'll keep in mind when you do get into your breakout groups, or if you have questions that you place in the chat, we ask that you speak genuinely. If you have a thought or a question or an idea, please bring it forward. That's how we learn, because if you're called to say something or ask something, that means others of us probably have that question too. Listen to each other carefully. We're building something here that's on a platform or a foundation of what we've had over the years, and we want to grow in new and innovative ways. So listen carefully beyond the words and help to try to understand. Challenge one another's perspectives with respect. We've all walked a different path and had different sets of experiences. So when we truly can hear and understand someone else's perspective, we're getting closer to seeing the whole picture of what this world is about. And have fun together. So I hope you meet new people. I hope you enjoy each other and have a good time today. In the chat box, if you would, by way of introduction, this is long, so put your name, your town, where you are right now, and your affiliation. If you're a business member, if you're a parent, a child care provider, an advocate, jot that down. And then if you can think of one thing that you think would most strengthen childcare in West Virginia, jot that down. And then we can look in the chat box and see what folks think. So take a minute and do a little chatting, please. Let's see what we've got coming in. So we have 2 business coaches, one from the southern part of the state, one from Charleston, more access to funds for childcare services. Elkview, wow, they're coming in so fast. More, so we have business coaches, additional support for families to afford childcare, Jim McKay says. Stabilize the budget, Micah Webb. Dr. Jeffrey, increasing quality of programs for the health and wellness and brain development of young children. Funding for daycare businesses, says a coach from Berkeley Springs, Mary Hott. More funding, says Priscilla Santos. Logan from the Benedum Foundation says increased salaries for workers. Increase the quality so it's more than just babysitting, because we're developing young minds. We need startup funding, says a coach from the Huntington area. More support to encourage startups. Delegate Young says she's here to help and to learn how to help. Thank you all so much. And what I'd like to do now, is advance this slide and ask Barbara Gephardt to introduce Lisa and begin our conversation, please.
Thank you, Leslie. We're so thrilled to have Lisa Ertl with us today. Lisa is the director of the Division of Early Care and Education at the Department of Health and Human Resources, and she's a little busy these days. So on the next slide, I'm going to give you a quick little preview of the main topics that we're going to be talking about today. So if we can switch to the next one. West Virginia has been lucky in the past year, and fortunate with the rest of the country in being able to receive some funding for childcare, particularly because of COVID and for relief of COVID difficulties that Helen described so well. I'm not sure who's controlling the screen right now, but if we can go to the next slide.
I'm sorry, Barb, my buttons are frozen.
Can you click on the slide and then see if it helps?
Ta-da.
Okay. There we go. So there are three appropriations, and Lisa and I are going to take these one at a time and talk about them. But just to give you a quick preview of what we'll be talking about, funding came through the CARES Act. $23 million came to West Virginia through that. The second allocation was the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was a total of $66.8 million. And then the most recently, the American Rescue Plan is providing over $260 million for childcare in West Virginia. So Lisa and I are going to kind of have a conversation about this. And we're taking down the slides for now, so you can kind of pretend that the two of us are sitting in soft chairs in a living room somewhere just conversing, and you're able to listen in and take advantage of that. So we'll start first with the CARES funding. The CARES funding passed in March of 2020. And it included nationally $3.5 billion for childcare. At the time, we thought that was a lot. Since then, we've kind of changed our tune a little bit. But from that, West Virginia received $23 million. So Lisa, if you could talk a little bit about how those CARES Act funds have been used. Whoop, you're on mute, Lisa.
So sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great.
I apologize. First, I wanted to say thank you for everybody taking the time to be here, and I'm especially happy that the parents are able to be here. I know it's tough missing work and missing other obligations you have as a family, but it's so important to have parents participate in forums and groups like this. So I really appreciate that. The first stimulus, the CARES Act, paid for many things. It paid for child care for over-income essential workers. It paid for child care subsidy for all child care providers, initially child care providers who were closed and who were open, but eventually it paid only child care providers that were open based on subsidy tier 3 quality rates. And that is still ongoing. Payment of essential workers is currently ongoing. Direct payment retention checks were sent out, and that helped offset the cost of that personal protective equipment, that PPE, personnel costs, sanitation supplies, or anything else that the child care provider deemed was COVID-related expense. And also, it helped pay for grants, specifically for some school-age capacity building, because we knew coming into this, it looked like at the time schools were going to be closed, and we needed to make sure that providers had some space and what they needed to accommodate that remote learning that ended up happening. It grants for staff payroll or bonuses. It could be used for that. And then sanitation grants for that ongoing need of sanitation supplies. Early on, we had a provider say that in her budget, it was an increase of about $1,000 a month for all of these different sanitation and PPE equipment, all of that. And that was a brand new ongoing expense for them. So that's something that a lot of child care providers took advantage of, was that grant really specifically for that sanitation and PPE equipment.
Thanks, Lisa. And the next, and that kind of took us through 2020, really, because the next allocation, which was the Consolidated Appropriations Act, was passed in December of 2020. Right. And this legislation nationally, there was $10 billion allocated to childcare. West Virginia got 66.8 million of that. So can you explain how these funds are being used and maybe still being used, still being spent?
Yes, these are still being spent. Funds are still going out with this. This act, that what I call the second stimulus, CARES was the first stimulus. This was the second stimulus for childcare. Allowed for a temporary increase in childcare subsidy rates and various incentives, such as non-traditional care hours, those type of things. We were able to raise the reimbursement rates by $4 per child per day, or the market rate, whichever was higher. And we're able to use the funds to do this through December 2022. So even though they're temporary, we're able to finish this year with that temporary rate increase and those incentive increases, and through next year. So that's a wonderful thing. Increase the tier 2 and tier 3 quality rates. It was, for example, $6 per day per child for tier 3 is what it is now, and then an additional $3 per day per child for tier 2 programs. So we were able to raise that. A third thing we were able to do was increase the other incentives that I mentioned, such as non-traditional hours to $6 per day per qualifying child, and $3 per child per day for the special needs rate. Non-traditional hours is something that parents often need. They need that evening care, that weekend care, those especially that are doing some type of shift work. So that's good that we're able to do that. And another thing that we have been able to do is offer what we are calling capacity building grants for new child care programs. We need to work on increasing available slots statewide and the overall availability of child care statewide. So programs that are new will get funding specifically during the first month that they're open, at the 6-month mark, and then at the 12-month mark. So we're able to kind of roll this funding forward for a year for new providers. And then also we're doing that for currently operating programs. We want to help them to increase their capacity. Often a child care provider may have extra space that they are not using because they don't have the funds to build that space. The cost of converting unused space or increasing space can be a daunting prospect, but these grants can help offset the cost to increase that capacity. In addition, if a provider wishes to move from one provider type to another, for example, if a provider is a family child care home and wishes to grow to become a family child care facility, these funds could be used to do that. Of course, applicable space requirements, fire marshal requirements, and health department requirements applicable to the provider type will still need to be met. So those are 5 or 6 things that we're doing currently with the second set of stimulus funds.
That's great. For those people who don't speak this language every day, I have to clarify a couple of terms.
Thank you.
So when Lisa is talking about the reimbursement rates, those are set for children who are with families with low enough income to receive a subsidy for their child care costs. And then the program is reimbursed for those children. So that's in general, what we're talking about with subsidy rates. And with the tiers, those are quality tiers. So there are certain standards to meet. Every center starts at a tier 1, but they can meet higher standards to be tier 2 or accreditation to be tier 3. So that's helpful as well. And if there are other questions that people have, I did want to mention, feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end a little bit. The other thing I was going to mention is the 3 types of childcare, being family childcare homes, family childcare facilities, which are a bit larger, and then childcare centers, which are even larger. So that's some of what Lisa's been talking about. And we'll have a slide later that shows the changes in the reimbursement rates. This is one of the more exciting things that's happened this year, especially for childcare programs. So let's talk a little bit then about the third stimulus, the American Rescue Plan. So that was just passed last month in March, and West Virginia will receive over $260 million, which for a state like West Virginia is a huge amount of money. Federally, there was a total of $39 billion that was allocated to states. And this is a very complicated act. And just even this part of childcare is very complicated. So we're just going to take this one at a time. Of this $260 million, $50 billion of it was a one-time addition to the Child Care and Development Block Grant, which is the major federal funding child care. So in West Virginia, this is just over $100 million. So Lisa, how does that compare to the amount of Child Care and Development Block Grant funds West Virginia was receiving before?
Sure. First, let me say that these funds have not been released to states yet, nor have states received federal guidance on how this money should and could be spent. However, the CARES Act funding, that first pot of money for the first stimulus and the second pot of money for the stimulus, they didn't have a breakout of specifically X amount of dollars needs to be used for the subsidy, the child care subsidy program. This one does. It breaks that out. And comparing the funds from what we traditionally get pre-pandemic, West Virginia gets annually $48 million for the pre-pandemic Child Care Development Block Grant subsidy funds. And those funds have to be broken down into quality dollars and subsidy dollars and all kinds of different ways that it kind of has to be divvied up. But this $100 million is specifically for child care subsidy funding for child care. So that's a little bit different than the first 2 pots of money. And it's really a dedicated amount for subsidy, which is exciting.
That's good clarification. I appreciate you saying that. But I mean, even despite the clarification, the increase from 48 million to 148 million is pretty astounding.
It's huge. Yeah.
So what kinds of activities could this funding support?
They can support the continuation of payment of child care for over-income essentials and other child care related subsidy initiatives, such as what we're doing right now with the temporary rate increase and increase of those non-traditional activities, such as the non-traditional hours or subsidy payments for caring for children with special needs, those type of things. So we're able to use this, look at this, and continue that, those things that we've already put in place. Right now, what we're seeing is that the language is broad. It doesn't require that the funds be used for COVID-related expenses. The other 2 acts were specifically, it said you have to use this for COVID-related expenses. And it's important to remember that these funds need to be used to supplement and not supplant any federal, state, or local public funds. So the guidance, like I said, hasn't come out yet. So we're kind of looking at things in a broad perspective. We know there's some things subsidy related that we can continue, and other things we can certainly look at subsidy related that we want to implement. Helen mentioned the implementation of paying based upon enrollment rather than attendance, and that's certainly something that's on the table being looked at.
That's helpful. Are there any other decisions? I mean, it's early yet, but are there any other decisions that you've made at this point, or are you still waiting on the guidance to really think through that more?
Really waiting on the guidance, and something we're going to talk about here in a little bit, how the surveys that we're going to be doing, the focus groups, all of that is kind of fitting into this. So it is early, so we don't really have any finalized decisions yet.
Mm-hmm. And how long will you have to spend those funds?
The funds, they have to be obligated. 50% at least have to be obligated by us by September 2023. And to obligate the funding, and then we have until September 30th, 2024 to liquidate the funding.
Okay, so you've got a while on that pot of money at least.
Yes. Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the other pot of money. So that was the 100 million of the 260.4. So the other piece is federally was about 24 billion, a huge amount of money. And for West Virginia, 160.4 million. This was what's called child care stabilization funding. And the real purpose of that was to help child care providers stabilize through the rest from the pandemic and through the rest of the pandemic. And this is a one-time grant, right? So,
Right.
So what are the federal requirements for these grants? Just as far as you know, I know that the guidance hasn't been specifically released
Right,
yet.
right. This is what we currently know. Once the federal guidance is received, it may change, but we, the lead agencies, or the lead agency, can set aside up to 10% of the award to administer funds. So obviously, West Virginia DHHR can't get all of these funds out. So we have some subcontractors, some grantees that are helping to get this money out. So that administrative 10% can be used to help them do that as well. So we do know that we're able to do that. We're able to, or we have to provide technical assistance and support for providers who are applying for and accessing these funds. We have to publicize the availability of these funds. We have to carry out activities that are designed to increase the supply of childcare. And we need to be able to provide technical assistance to help providers implement the required policies that are related to this funding and the activities that are related to the funding. We are required to use the remaining funds to provide grants to qualified child care providers. Right now, the definition at the federal level of a qualified child care provider is a provider who was either open and available or closed due to the COVID-19 public health emergency at the time of the application. We need to make sure that the funds are used to satisfy both federal and state health and safety requirements. And we need to make sure those that are getting the funds are 18 years of age or older. The grants can be used on current operating expenses and can, as much as possible, cover sufficient operating expenses to ensure continuous operations during the subgrant. The first two subsidy, not subsidy, but stimulus pots of money were used to help pay potentially previous expenses that were related to COVID. That's not the same with this pot of money. We're able to kind of look forward and help stabilize childcare in that way. How can we use this money moving forward? And then the expectation is that providers who are receiving this money are to, at the greatest extent possible, they need to continue to implement CDC guidance. So those guidelines we have in place right now, we need to use those moving forward.
Mhm. That makes sense. How long do you have to expend these funds?
These stabilization funds need to be obligated by September 2022 and liquidated by September 30th, 2023. But
Okay.
these funds can be used for the provider for personnel costs, benefits, premium payments, recruitment and retention, rent or mortgage payment, utilities. There's a huge list of things right now in the general information that we have that it can be used for. So cleaning and sanitation supplies, obviously, training and professional development related to health and safety practices, purchases or updates to equipment and supplies to respond to COVID-19, goods and services necessary to maintain or resume childcare services, and something that's very important that we need to consider, supports for mental health services for children and employees. And that might mean actual services of some type or some type of training on, the effects this is having on children, parents, caregivers, the whole population that this has affected.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Well,
really exciting.
sounds like the uses are pretty broad then. And,
Yes.
and from my understanding too, the expectation is that you start spending quickly. And because,
Yes.
so I did want to mention that because it's 50% by
By the end, 50% by the end of this year.
yes.
Yes.
So that's quite a bit of money, and but much needed for the child care programs.
Right.
Another piece of this act that people haven't talked about very much is that there is a permanent increase to the mandatory spending. And without getting too complicated, there is a part of the child care federal funding called the child care entitlement to states, and that is mandatory spending. And that has also increased. I only have the federal numbers. So the allocation federally increased by $633 million. So and this is a permanent increase, so that's exciting. But what was the increase for West Virginia?
West Virginia has not received that estimate yet.
Okay.
So I wish I had a little bit more information, but that's one of the things we're not sure what the estimate is at this point.
Well, I wanted to bring that up because, we've been talking about the stabilization funds we talked about as a one-time grant. The increase to the child care and development block grant is, it's there for now, but there's going to need to be some help to make sure that that's permanent. But this is permanent, so that's exciting. So will you think about this pot of money kind of alongside the other two pots of money, or will you think about it differently since it's a permanent increase?
Well, since it's permanent, we want to, once we know what our allocation increase is going to be, figure out what we can do because we're looking for that permanent funding to take that temporary status of these rate increases off, and make those permanent increases. And will we be getting enough dollars to be able to do that, to make those temporary rate increases permanent? So we want to be able to do that.
So that's your first priority, and
yes.
If not, then look at some other options. Yeah.
And obviously what we're kind of grappling with right now is how far can we stretch the funding? You know, can we look at potentially increasing the qualification levels of parents based upon that sliding scale fee, Barb, that you mentioned for income, those type of things. You know, how much money are we going to get? Can we make those rate increases permanent? And is there going to be funding there to perhaps increase the income eligibility guidelines in the future? You know, we're kind of looking at a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's important to families as well.
Absolutely.
Family eligibility. So since most of this is one-time allocations, what's going to be necessary to sustain this long-term?
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
The most obvious thing is an ongoing infusion of funding that's permanent and dedicated to childcare. That's needed to sustain. Several states not only have their child care development block grant funding and matching funds, but their states are also able to specifically budget significant sums for child care. That would be awesome if the state of West Virginia was able to do that. You know, right now, it's been said time and time again, child care is at the forefront. Everybody sees what happens when child care isn't available to the workforce now. And I think that we have state, local leadership, businesses, everybody listening. What is it that child care needs? So if something like this happened again, how can we stabilize that workforce in the long term? So I think that, you know, right now, not only funds, but those listening ears are so important to sustain this.
Well, and as a state and a nation, we have our work cut out for us because there's only so much that can be done inside state government. There also has to be that outside state government push.
Right.
And that's a great segue to the next question, really, because nationally, there's a lot of talk about how to use this new funding to build things back better. Let's make a better childcare system than we had before. What kind of things are you exploring that would be more like long-term updates to the childcare system that are beyond, of course, the need for increased subsidy reimbursement and increased eligibility? But what else are you thinking about?
Well, West Virginia families rely on access to child care in order to work. Everybody, you know, knows that. But without that access to affordable care, and the key word there is affordable, parents can't earn a living, businesses can't recruit reliable workers, and children miss out on early learning opportunities. And it's never been more apparent than right now during this pandemic. But that said, addressing how to build a better child care system in West Virginia won't only require our division to explore long-term solutions, but just what we're doing here, getting parents, providers, state leaders, interested stakeholders, everybody working in tandem to build this system. Everybody has ideas what we need moving forward. We need to kind of pull those ideas together and figure out how we can move forward together. It's not just what early care and education can do, it's what we can all do together.
And we'll get to that in just a minute. I do want to spend just a minute talking about the 3-year plans that are due. So some folks on the call may not know, but states have to develop a 3-year plan to use the Child Care and Development Block Grant funds. And it happens to be due this year on July 1st. So not only are you, spending all these funds, but trying to think about how you want to do things for the next 3 years. So what process will DHHR use to develop West Virginia's plan for the federal government?
Yeah. This state plan describes the process and activities that West Virginia uses to conduct activities that meet the Child Care Development Block Grant requirements. What ECE does, Early Care and Education does, is that we coordinate with individuals responsible for various parts of the child care program components, such as child care subsidy, health and safety monitoring, and ongoing quality improvement. early care and education is also required to share and receive input and feedback from the Early Childhood Advisory Council. And what we're planning are, and we're required to do it, but we would do it anyway. We're having public hearings that are going to be held towards the end of this month. So I can tell you a little bit more about that. They're going to be held via Zoom, May 25th, 26th, and 27th. There's going to be a morning session and an afternoon session. So there's going to be a total of 6 public hearings. More information will be coming out about that. And that's something that we are working as part of our strategy to get input from not only child care providers, but other interested entities in this 3-year plan. And like I said, that's stakeholders, that's parents, that's public officials, that's anybody that's interested in child care.
So let's talk a little bit more about the communications strategy. Sounds like you want to get input as well as sharing information out. So can you talk a little bit about that? And I know there's some focus groups planned, and so let's just talk about that for a while.
Okay. Well, this is where I really need your all's help a little bit. So I'm glad that we're here today to talk about this a little bit. But coordination with individuals for the various components of the plan, that has occurred. A draft is being developed, and it will be available by next Wednesday on our website. But we are going to be notifying via the various listservs, via our child care resource and referral agencies, that the plan is out there, the public comment period is open. But what we need are other ways to get it out to different stakeholders, to businesses, to parents, to everybody. So that's kind of what we need a little bit of help with. We'll be able to get it out to child care providers, but we need some help even broadening that net to get more input from other folks.
Mm-hmm. And when you talked about these 6 public hearings, are different types of audiences or different regions of the state, or how are you structuring those?
They are number one, they're Zoom. Number 2, they're going to be out of the various child care resource and referral agencies. There's a morning and an afternoon session. There's going to be specific questions for different participants. There's going to be some questions, guiding questions for parents. There's going to be some information that would be specific to parents, some that would be specific to child care providers, some specific to stakeholders. So it's a mixed group that's going to participate, but there's going to be specific information and questions for each group.
So is this the same as the focus groups, the public
This
hearings?
is not, no, this is not the same as the focus groups. The focus groups are really, this is specific to our child care state plan. These public hearings. The focus groups are, number one, we're going to also be doing surveys through Collective Impact with Bruce Decker, as well as focus groups. We're going to be asking, once again, stakeholders, parents, guardians, adoptive parents, anybody that wants to participate in the surveys. We're going to be asking some various questions specifically about Pot 3 of the money, the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan funds, along with some other questions about the child care system in general. And then those focus groups, we're going to take those surveys and we're going to collect that information. And then those focus groups are going to go into more depth about what we learned and information we need to know based upon what we gleaned from the surveys. So those are completely separate from the I can't think of the name of it, the public hearings.
Okay. Yeah,
There's just so much, there's so much going on.
I'm sure. So what's the time frame on the surveys and the focus groups? That I'm assuming that'll be after the public hearings.
Correct. We're going to finish up the public hearings in May. The surveys are going to go out in early June. They're going to be assessed. And then in late June, that's when we're going to have the focus groups. And I'm hoping after all of this, we have a nice kind of report as well from Collective Impact that kind of talks about the state of childcare as it is today and what the suggestions are and the ways we can move it forward. So I'm hoping at the end of this, we'll have a nice kind of tool to start our work with, so to speak, to move forward.
Yeah. How will you be recruiting people for the focus groups? And are we talking about multiple focus groups, like multiple focus groups for providers, multiple ones for parents, et cetera?
Yes. The discussion has been that these focus groups are going to be specific to the interested party. Maybe one that's specific, or not one, specifically focus groups specifically for parents, focus groups specifically for providers, focus groups specifically for stakeholders. Because although the survey is going to be broad, it's going to have some specific questions in there. We need to hone it down even further in the focus groups to get some more detailed information specific to these subgroups, if you will, the parent groups, the stakeholder groups, that type of thing. So we're working on all of that right now, exactly how they're going to break out and how they're going to be done.
Well, I think we have the perfect audience here to help you recruit some participants for those.
Absolutely.
As well. So that's great. Thank you, Lisa. We're going to move back to the slides for a minute. And I'm going to review these 3 pots of money because this is a lot of information. And I want to be sure that people get the numbers down and the kind of top lines of that. Then we'll come back with some of the questions from the chat box. So this one I've already gone over. So this is what Lisa calls the first stimulus. I think everybody can relate to that because of the checks that we hopefully got to. And this money was able to be used to provide childcare to essential workers regardless of their income. So they did not have to qualify according to the income eligibility guidelines if they were essential workers. It also paid providers based on enrollment, not attendance, which has been a huge issue. And as you heard from Helen, one of the issues that this group has been looking at. Also, the first 2 tiers, and these are the quality tiers again, 1 and 2 were increased to tier 3 rates. And all providers were eligible for some payments for both for critical care site relief payments and also for retention payments. Then the second, on the next slide, the second pot of funding, the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which is kind of ongoing, or what's being spent now basically, is the subsidy rate increases, and we're going to look at that in just a minute. That Lisa mentioned of either $4 per child per day or 75% of the market rate, whichever is higher. And for those not schooled in childcare, 75% of the market rate is really considered to be the best practice, or at least minimum best practice, right, for states, and many states have not been able to do that. This is retroactive to March 1st of this year, and we'll go through at least 2022, but this is the one that would need to be made permanent to continue beyond that. And then about almost a third of that, 21 million, would be given in grants to programs. And then the third pot of funding, well, actually, I want to put this chart up there, and I want to leave it up there for a minute and explain it a little bit. This is a chart that shows what the childcare rate structure for reimbursement rates for subsidies was prior to March 1st, and that's the orange amounts, and then the rate structure that's effective from March of this year through December of 2022. Along the left-hand column, you can see the types of care, the three types that I described: family child care home, facility, and child care center. And then there's some specific rates for certain types of care that aren't those three main types: out of school time care, which is often after school or summer care, informal or relative child care, and in-home child care. So for the three main types of care, there's three tiers of quality, and you can see how the rates vary. You can also easily see on this chart how those rates have been increased by at least $4 per child per day. And again, for those who are maybe not as deep in childcare, the cost of infant care is higher than the cost of, say, preschool care or school age care, because more staff are required for that number of children. So, for example, you might have 4 infants to 1 staff person, whereas for an older group, it might be 10 or 12 per staff person. The incentive rates that Lisa talked about are down at the bottom there. If a child has a special need that's documented, there's an addition to the daily rate, or if non-traditional care is being provided, there's also an addition. Anything else that you would want to point out, Lisa, on this chart?
No, I think to me, it's really well done. I don't think there's anything. It just shows that increase that we were able to temporarily do, and I'm hoping that we can make permanent. But there's nothing significant that you didn't include. So.
Okay, well, I wanted to leave that up there for a minute because some people might really be trying to digest that there's a lot on that slide. And then the next slide is the last bucket of funding, the American Rescue Plan. And this kind of shows the 3 parts that we talked about: the $100 million that supplements the Child Care and Development Block Grant, the $160 million that is for the Child Care Stabilization, looking at grants and obligating that fairly quickly, at least half of it. And then the third piece, the permanent increase in the child care entitlement to states. And then just made a note on here that there will be these surveys and focus groups with collective impact to look at use of the funds, and also getting some input into the 3-year plan. So I think we're ready to go to some questions from the chat box. And Leslie's been monitoring that. I've kind of been busy here. So Leslie, I'll let you mention a few of these. I know you're also watching the time so that we have some time for small groups as well.
Yes, thank you. Well, so you've touched on this, but this was early on. So just to clarify, payment for a child's enrollment versus a child's attendance at the center, that's something that you hope to make permanent, but it's not yet. Is there any clarification?
Right now, the subsidy reimbursements are based upon attendance. That child needs to attend at least 1 day currently for the child care provider to be paid for all of the billable days. What we're looking at, but no decision has been made, is the interest in taking that from an attendance-based reimbursement to an enrollment-based reimbursement. And of course, we have to look at the funding. How long will the funding last? Will the expense is greater based upon enrollment versus attendance? All of those things are being looked at. But right now, it's still attendance-based reimbursement.
Thank you, Lisa. And that was the question about being able to stabilize the business of the childcare businesses, which I know you understand.
Yes, it's just like if a childcare provider has a private pay parent that's paying $100 per week, whether or not their child attends.
Right.
we want to be able to consider, can we pay subsidy whether or not that child attends based upon their enrollment only, just like the private pay is, as opposed to that child needs to attend at least one day per month to get all the billable months or billable days within that month. So it's kind of looking at it that way.
Thank you. Okay, another question in the chat. It relates to the term over income. So what does over income or over subsidy mean when you say that? Or when
Over income, we talked a little bit about the eligibility requirements, and I'm sorry I don't have all of that information in front of me, but a parent or parents have to make X amount of dollars based upon, right now the entry level is 85% of the state median income, I believe. If an R&R person knows all of those and they're out there and can jump in, that would be great. But basically, if you're over income, you wouldn't qualify for child care subsidy. But right now, because you're essential and you're over income, we're using the stimulus dollars to care for children of essential workers, regardless of their income, whether they make, $500,000 or not. We're paying for childcare if they have come and applied.
That's a perfect segue. It's like you already saw these chat questions. So the next one is, are essential workers subsidies going to continue? Are they continuing now? And how long do you anticipate them continuing?
That is a question that's actually, we're hoping to have more information, but that's a question I can't definitively answer. The intention was to roll it back. We haven't received that third pot of stimulus dollars, but that's one of the things that's within that act, is to help essential workers, as the state defines what essential workers are. So that's being considered, but no final decision is being made or has been made yet.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yep.
Okay, I've got one more, unless Barb sees something else in the chat. So can the administrative 10% be used to update the payment system, or is it only for staffing and subcontracts?
That's a good question. But right now, West Virginia DHHR, is developing a new system. We currently use the family and child tracking system to do payments and things like that. But we're working with an agency, a company called Optum, who is developing a whole brand new system, DHHR wide, for payment for providers, all of that, that we should be able to roll out, fingers crossed, in a couple of years. It's going to include everything from eligibility for certain benefit services online, to a child care provider being able to input their staff information in, possibly do billing within the system. So all of that's being looked at.
Okay, that's good. So I didn't tell you the truth, because there is another one on the next page. Okay, can any of the funds be used for buildings to expand a facility or to renovate a facility in order to accommodate more children?
That will be considered. We want to increase the number of slots. We want to really look at the number of slots we have for infants and toddlers, because that's always a huge need statewide, is the number of slots available for infants and toddlers. I don't want to say that a grant will pay for a whole new classroom to be built from the ground up, but it can help offset that cost.
That would be good. In my role, having worked with the Small Business Development Center coaches, I know that there are childcare businesses, providers out there that want to expand and they're right on the cusp, and how do they organize their finances to do that? So that's good, if that could be a possibility.
And that's the way that what we understand it as the way it is right now.
Great.
So hopefully that doesn't change.
Okay, thank you. Barb, did you see anything else in the chat box while we were talking?
Yes, there's a little bit about, there's several other questions in here. One is whether there have been any surveys done with essential workers to see how having the free childcare did help them financially. Any kind of like collecting of stories or surveys or anything like that?
We haven't collected stories or surveys at this point, but that's a population obviously we want to include in the upcoming surveys that are going to happen. So we want to make sure that we're reaching out to them as well.
Okay. And also someone asked, back to the essential worker thing, will the final decision be made before the essential worker certificates expire at the end of this week?
That remains to be seen. I hate to say that. We don't have an answer as of today at 2 o'clock.
That's okay. Honesty is appreciated. And then this might be the last question. Two-part question. First part is, it sounds like after the survey period, then the focus groups, the funds may not be available until late summer. I'm not sure if that was.
Well, number one, West Virginia hasn't even gotten their funds yet. We haven't gotten the guidance yet. But I understand, based upon, here we are in May, we're doing the focus groups and the surveys and the focus groups in June, where they can see that it can take a little bit into summer, and that might be right. We might not get our money until, the end of May, beginning of June. It took a while to get the other two pots of funds once, that announcement was made.
I
There's
think
time for one more.
Oh, is there another? Did you find another one, Leslie?
No, I just was thinking if there was one more, we had time for one more.
Okay.
There was one on who makes the decision regarding paying the center's enrollment versus attendance. Is it DHHR, the legislature, or is it by federal regs?
It's by recommendation of DHHR. All of the spending decisions are, early care and education makes the recommendation. It goes to our secretary. It's discussed at much higher levels than we are. I don't want to say it's necessarily our governor sitting down and making that decision, but he knows everything that's going on with the funding as well. So all I can say is that the decisions are made at a higher level than I am, primarily at the secretary's level at this point.
Thank you, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to move us to some breakout rooms so we can hear from. So you have been pre-sorted. Jesse worked hard to get sector groups. And because there are so many of you, there may be more than one group in your sector. There is a facilitator in your group, and your facilitator has a handout with these questions on it. But if you're somebody who likes to have your questions in front of you, you may want to jot these down. So you see question 1 is, from your sector's vantage point, what should West Virginia DHHR consider in its planning? So you're the expert from a parent's point of view. You're the expert from a business coaching point of view. You're the expert from a community agency, and you guys are broad. So when you introduce yourselves and where you're from, you'll see you're very broad in that category. And you're the expert as a childcare provider, a childcare business. So take advantage of that time to dig in and share what you know. And then the second question is, what can your sector do to help West Virginia DHHR make the most of these funds? Because this is a heavy burden and a big opportunity all at the same time. So if we do that together, we're in a lot better shape. So there are 4 groups. Did you want to say something?
Go ahead, I'm sorry. I have one more thing to say before we break, if that's okay.
Yeah, you want to say it now? That's good.
Well, one thing that we hadn't talked about yet, we're talking about needing the infusion of funds and that type of thing, but more and more information has started to come out about the American Families Plan. And part of that plan from the Biden administration specifically is looking at a long-term solution to the infrastructure of child care. There's, like I said, more information coming out about it, but it looks like that there's going to be even more funding available for child care, looking at child care in a different way to build that infrastructure. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Thank you. That's really important. I had just read about that last night in the news and I thought, yay. But you know, a lot of money can be a blessing and a curse if we don't plan well together. So thank you for coming to us and allowing us to learn from you.
Mm-hmm.
So in your breakout room, you'll first introduce yourselves and the facilitator will help you do that. And then you'll talk together about each of the questions in turn. And then we've asked your facilitator to work with you to identify a couple key points from each question. And you may ask your facilitator to do that on your behalf as a group, or one of you in the group may say, I'd like to do that. And that's okay too. So you just barter with your facilitator and decide how you want to handle it. You will have 20 minutes. Jesse and I'll set your timer to remind you. And then we'll come back and share a couple of highlights so we each get a flavor. And then I'll be developing notes afterwards, so you'll get everybody's input fully at the end of the time. Are there any questions that you have before we go into our breakout rooms? Jesse's going to magically send us. Okay, thank you so much. Hey, is everyone back?
Magically so.
All right, well, thank you. So I'm going to ask us all to focus on the first question, which is from your sector's vantage point, what else should West Virginia DHHR, Department of Health and Human Resources, consider in its planning? And I'd like to start with parents. So Amy Jo, what are a couple things that the parents said in response to that question?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. We were still talking when we got cut off, so we're ready to fix all the problems. So just want you to know. I think one of the things that we talked about was how there doesn't seem to be a lot of discussion that we're aware of as parents about what quality means and how that plays into the childcare system setup and design. And so we were talking about sometimes like, what does it look like so it's equitable to families who can't necessarily to pay more than what they're already paying to get a higher quality care for their child. So
Your
line is where quality doesn't really hit on across the board. Like if I just don't have the financial means to pay more for a higher quality center, children are still receiving quality services. That was one of the things that came up.
Thank you, Amy Jo. And your audio was cutting in and out a little bit, but I think I was there for some of that conversation. So the main thing is how do you know what quality is as a parent, so you know what you're buying? And then secondly, what if you don't have the means to afford quality, and why is that an issue? It's not equitable, so that if parents with lower incomes can't access quality care for their children and their brain development.
Yes.
All right, thank you. I'd like to go now to business coaches. Barb, what about your team? What'd you say from your sector's vantage point?
Well, we spent most of the time on the second question, honestly, but we talked about how there was really a need for materials that helped lay out a step-by-step process of understanding the roles of different partners, like the resource and referral agencies versus the role of DHHR at the state level, and then also just understanding step-by-step how a center or facility or home might start or might expand. So that was the thing that we talked about the most for that particular question. And we'll have more to share on the second one.
All right, thank you so much. Donna Schramm was the other facilitator for the other coaching group. What'd you all say from your perspective DHHR should consider in its planning?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we pretty much mirrored what our coworker said, so that we need more clarity on the requirements, like when somebody comes to us and says, I want to start a facility, what are those requirements that we can help them with running a legal, legitimate daycare? What qualifications do they need, or if there's any? The other thing we came up with was, does WVDHHR work with the tax department and Secretary of State? Because what if somebody comes and says, hi, I got my business license, so I'm a licensed daycare. They're licensed through the state tax department, but maybe not through DHHR. And so is there a disconnect there, or are they working together to make sure that license means fully licensed by everyone they need license through? So that's the other thing that we came up with for that first question.
Great, thank you so much. So we'll be sure to include these. Community agencies. Logan, what'd you guys say?
So we had a really diverse array of folks in our group, sort of from, I guess, under a community agency umbrella, but very, very different perspectives represented, which made for a really interesting conversation. And we sort of had three big takeaways from this first question. First, a hope that there will be focus within DHHR on the how of the implementation and rollout of a lot of this federal funding disbursement, and with particular focus on supporting R&Rs, R&R agencies as they try to take advantage of this continued wave of increased investment. Second, just considering all of the potentially transformative legislation that's poised to come out, a hope that, there will be an effort to broaden mindsets on creative ways that we might use funding to, better support needs across the board, rather than sort of sticking to the old ways of doing things. And finally, a really interesting comment that there's more and more talk about these shared services models that could be a really big benefit for childcare agencies, and sort of in terms of supporting their businesses while also improving their quality and relieving the burden on providing certain services. And so potentially some consideration for using some funds to help pilot some of those shared service models was another thought that was thrown out.
Great, thank you. And now WVU has been working with that in mind. So that would be exciting news to a lot of childcare providers and university, and try to do something different. Susie, and I know you were working with a group of community agency members too. What did you all say from your vantage point DHHR should consider in its planning?
You're muted.
Sorry, okay. We came at it from a different perspective. That one thing we said is an updated data system that would help us with so much information, like collaborations, being able to do grants, a lot of things that we should be able to have at our fingertips that right now we cannot do. And the other thing that we talked about, which I know has been in the works for years and we just never had the money, and now seems the perfect time, is the multi-collaborative quality rating system, We have just right now, just one little tiny piece of it. And we think it should be across the board. That would be Head Start, pre-K, childcare, all of them. And
Thank
it ties in with what somebody else said about parents not recognizing what quality is. So that was going to be in the original plan for that is marketing for families, what quality would look like. So that would be all in the same thing.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And childcare businesses, childcare providers, early education specialists. Helen, what did your team say?
We had very interesting conversations, and we agreed on some of our ideas. And one idea was to raise the income level for families. I know that was talked about before, so that more families can receive childcare assistance. The essential care thing really helped and would, if it continued, helped, but a lot of them made a lot of money and really didn't need that extra support as much as some of our families that were just stuck in the middle, that they made too much to receive care, but not enough to pay for care. So that would be very helpful if they could raise that so that more families could enjoy that. And another idea was because essential care workers helped childcare centers, the thought of paying for childcare for the employees of childcare centers. And the reason for that is childcare costs a lot of money. So you hire someone, which would be nice with a 4-year degree, and they have 2 children. Well, they can't afford the childcare. And you say, well, they would have to pay for childcare anyway. And that is true. But childcare centers do not pay them the salary that other places pay, like Head Start or boards of education. So not only would that help with them getting a good education and a quality program and being a part of it, it would be a great hiring tool to get educated teachers in our programs because we can't afford to pay them the salaries and the health insurance and so forth that other entities do. So those were our 2 big things.
Thank you so much. Christy, you had a group of childcare providers. Also, what were your recommendations for consideration and planning?
We had a wonderful group with a lot of amazing voices, and Tiffany Gale is going to be reporting out for our group.
Thank you.
We talked about the title. The subsidy funds are just so low that childcare centers are forced to limit the number of subsidy families that they accept, which is just extremely unfortunate. And so the funds need to be increased. And we talked about how thankful we are that they are going to be increased through December 2020, but it really needs to be a permanent change, especially with them not changing in at least 5 years. We also said that child care centers need to be paid based on enrollment and not whether the child is in attendance or not, because we have no way of filling that space. If a child is absent, it's not our fault. We want the kids to be there. We want it to get paid, and we have to pay our staff no matter what. It's not like just because, 4 kids are absent today, we can send a teacher home. And the third thing that we talked about was similar to what somebody else mentioned, was the raise in the income gap. There definitely needs to be a raise there. It's the families who just barely don't make it that really get hurt.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And if you don't mind, would you go ahead and pick up that second question? What can your sector, in other words, what can childcare providers, childcare businesses do to help DHHR with this whole planning piece?
We spent a lot of time on question 1, so we didn't get a chance to talk much about question 2, but what we did get to discuss was the lack of communication, and I think the fact that childcare providers want to have direct access to talking with the people who make decisions, but it's hard to kind of figure out who makes the decisions. And while we do have, communication in that, like, it kind of moves up the chain. I think it is a lot more meaningful to the people who do make the decisions to hear directly from the people who are impacted by these decisions. And so,
Oh, sorry.
and, you know, I have providers in the area that we all, you know, get together with and things like that. And we want to talk to people. We want to talk to our senators, our delegates, our governor, our DHHR, everyone, but it kind of falls on deaf ears if we don't know how to get there or who to talk to.
Great. So you have to offer your voice, and we just can help you by getting an avenue so you can share your ideas.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Helen, would you mind sharing with us what you all said you could do to help as childcare providers?
Well, we actually spent a lot of our time on the first question also. So I will just put in what we're doing right now, belonging to the focus groups, doing the surveys, talking to other child care center directors and getting our voice out to get different ideas to improve it.
Great, thank you. So you can also help with communication. Let's go to parents. Amy Jo, what did you all say you could do in terms of helping with this whole planning process?
Sure. I turned my video off. I hope you can hear me a little better now, Leslie.
Yes.
We were talking about letters to the editor. Excuse me. Not only that, but to do a little bit of research and find out who we can email and just be in communication with. You know, members of the legislature, members of DHHR. Lisa had mentioned maybe even as far as the governor. And then story collecting from parents. That could be videos. It could be just through surveys or, you know, written testimonies.
Great.
We funded a marketing team to make sure that people who aren't in that, you know, necessarily in CCRC already signed up, but they need childcare, and we need to reach those people who aren't in the system but need the system, so they can make sure that they hear about things like, oh, the local center is expanding, or this funding is available for essential workers. And so we thought maybe a CCRC marketing team would be helpful.
Great, thank you so much. All right, let's see what business providers had to say. Donna, what did you all say as coaches you could do to help? Doug, are you still there?
I'm here. Okay, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I was waiting for it to unmute. It wouldn't unmute. We said that we can help the providers with navigating some of the obstacles to start expand as we become aware of the requirements. So if we can have like a list of those requirements, when somebody comes to us saying we want to start a daycare, we can then help them navigate through some of that. We can also make sure that we can pass along that information to any interested parties or daycare providers that we currently work with or have worked with in the past, if that information changes as we get that. So if we can be made aware, we can get that to our clients and anyone who comes to us looking to do this.
Thank you so much, Donna. All right, we are growing. Barb, what'd you all say as business coaches in your team that you could do to help?
Very similar to what Donna just reported. I think in general, just support from the business perspective, because many childcare providers, that is not necessarily their strength. So in addition to startup and expansion that Donna mentioned, we also made the point that helping existing programs be able to maximize their revenue. So just making those kinds of connections between business and childcare providers. And we also made the point that these services are free. And so part of it maybe is just letting people know about that. There's federal and state money that funds these business coaches, and also training that is online on topics like marketing. So there are a lot of resources, and really just the connections need to be made so that referrals can be made back and forth between childcare and business.
Great, thank you. So now we have our community agencies, which is a really huge and broad and diverse group. But Susie, could you tell us what you all said you could do to help?
Yeah, we had 2 different types of collaborations that we could do with community partners, just like all of us that are in these 2 groups that are the community agencies, bringing them together, because this conversation has just gotten started. So where can we go from here? How can we all work together? Because as we talked about earlier, we all realize how essential childcare is. So having all those partners get together, and then also taking the example that's done in the Parkersburg area of a variety of foundations that have collaborated together. I mean, they've just reached out to those local childcares, and that is a model that I think could be followed in other parts of the state. I mean, they've just done an amazing job of that. So I think other parts could benefit from following suit and reaching for foundations to partner to help these centers and family providers.
Thank you, Susie. I want to tell everybody else, community agencies kind of became a catch-all category. So we had private foundations in there. We have legislators in that group. And we also had advocates, and R&R folks. So that was very broad. Thank you for that. And Logan, what do you guys say you could do in this broad catch-all category of community?
Well, kind of in a similar, I think, vein to what a lot of folks have been saying so far, there was talk of, especially from an R&R perspective, better coordination within agencies, across agencies, and also with DHHR and other resources, perhaps through common verbiage or sort of commonly held protocol or information, so that they can better connect people to resources, perhaps centers that call them or others that call them, and being able to direct them to places that have information and resources for them.
So this idea of coordinating across these sectors so that people can more easily partner. But before that, we kind of have to have a common language so that we can communicate with each other, because we're all willing to help. We just don't maybe know the words.
Yep.
Okay,
Precisely.
great. Oh, what a great bunch. Did I get everybody? Because sometimes I just skim right on past and don't mean to. Okay, I think I did. I was trying to check you off as I went. And the facilitators are going to scan or photograph and send, however they prefer, their content back to me. And those will go in the notes. And the notes will go out to all attendees as long as we have, Jesse will have your email, so you'll get this information. Just as a recap, some of the things that I heard were that people want to help. You're willing to help regardless of the sector. We want to see access improved. We want to see affordability improved. We want quality childcare, and we want to help parents understand what that is and then be able to afford it. We also have a whole business community at our disposal ready to help, but they need to understand the language and access to information so that they can help existing childcare providers expand or maximize their revenues, and not at the expense of quality, while helping children develop, and also help new folks start up. We have innovation is a big thing we want to hear and see with this investment. How can we be innovative? How can we do creative things that expand and support our system as we move forward? And we are willing to communicate with each other. We are willing to share what we know and get more people's opinions to help shape the plan. Any other observations that you want to add that I may have missed? Did anything jump out at you that you might not have heard me just mention? Sorry. Didn't mean to click to the next slide and cut you off, so I'm still open to observations. Okay, just so you know, then everybody senses it's nearly 3 o'clock. We will get you information back to attendees by May 7th. I will type up these notes and get them back to Jesse. Would you also please make sure that Keys has your email? If whoever your contact was that helped you find this location today, if you're unsure that Jesse at Keys for Healthy Kids has your email, get back with them and they'll help you make sure that we have it. Is there anything else anybody wants to say or any questions that you have before we go?
I just want to add, if you were not registered for the conference for one reason or another, or you requested that I send you or someone else send you a link to be able to get in, then I probably do not have your email in a handy place, and I would recommend sending it to me and asking to be added to the list.
Great. Thank you all so very much. Special thanks to Donna and Logan, who I contacted at the very last minute and said, will you please facilitate a group? I appreciate your willingness. And as always, thanks to this core team comprised of Keys for Healthy Kids and West Virginia Association for Young Children. Thank you, West Virginia business coaches and all the community members and advocates and foundations that support us. I look forward to continuing working together. And thank you, Lisa Ertl, for taking
Hey, Lisa.
time,
Thank you.
energy. Lisa, do you have anything to say to anybody? Thank you again for your, have a great Wednesday.
I would like to say one thing for the people that want to know what quality looks like. Check out our recent West Virginia Champion Knapsack Centers on Keys for Healthy Kids Facebook, and you can see some wonderful videos of our centers. Helen Post Brown owning one of them and receiving that award at Sunbeam, and you'll get a kind of glimpse of what a quality center looks like. Sorry,
you, Dr.
selfless
Jeffrey.
promotion. Selfless promotion.
Thank you, everybody.